The most dangerous thing a man can do is let people think patience is the same as weakness. I let my son-in-law make that mistake for 2 years, and I did it on purpose. My name's Walter Croft, and on a Tuesday morning in early March, sitting on my own back porch in Asheville, North Carolina, my daughter's husband slid a folder across my table like he was doing me a favor. "I want to be upfront with you, Walter," he said, "before the wedding, before things get complicated." I looked at the folder. His firm's letterhead in the corner. That particular kind of navy blue law offices use when they want you to feel small before you've read a word. "What is this, Grant?" "A postnuptial agreement," he said, "for Denise and me. I know we've been married 8 months already, but I want to protect what I've built. My clinic, my investments. It's just smart business, Walter. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." He said it, looking me dead in the eye. Sitting at the table where I'd taught his wife to ride a bike, where I'd walked her down the aisle 4 months after this man put a ring on her finger. 8 months married, and he was drawing lines around what was his, like my daughter was a liability that needed managing. "She know about this?" I asked. "She will. I wanted your blessing on the approach first. Man to man. You understand how these things work, don't you, old-timer?" Old-timer. I'd heard that one before. Usually right before somebody made the worst financial decision of their life. Welcome back to the porch, family. If this is your first time sitting with me, grab something to drink, because this one's going to take a while, and it's going to be worth it. Drop where you're tuning in from down in the comments, hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and settle in. I want to be honest with you, the way I try to be honest with everybody who sits at this table. I didn't feel anger that morning. Anger is loud, and loud men make mistakes. What I felt was quiet, and quiet is dangerous. But this story doesn't start on that Tuesday morning. It starts 11 months earlier, on a Thursday evening at a fundraiser dinner for the county hospital, when Grant Ashwood walked into my daughter's life wearing a charcoal suit and a smile that had been rehearsed in a mirror more than once. I wasn't at that dinner. I heard about it secondhand, from Denise, glowing over the phone the way she used to glow when she was 17, and thought every boy who opened a car door for her was the one. "Daddy, he's a doctor, runs his own clinic." He asked about my work, my actual work, not just what I do for fun. Nobody does that. I should tell you something about my daughter, because it matters. Denise runs a small accounting firm out of a converted storefront downtown. Careful woman, meticulous. Balances other people's books for a living and has never once, not once, been late on a single payment in her own life. She built that business from nothing after her mother passed, working nights while she finished her certification. She is, without question, the most responsible person I know, which is exactly why it never occurred to her to look closely at a man who seemed to have his whole life in order already. Grant Ashwood ran a family medicine clinic on the east side of town. Nice building, nice cars in the lot, nice watch on his wrist that he mentioned more than a man should mention a watch. He told Denise he'd built the practice from the ground up after residency, that he'd turned down a hospital position to be his own boss. He told her about a rough patch early on, investors who'd burned him, which was why he was careful now, protective of what he had. It was a good story. Sympathetic. The kind of story that makes a good-hearted woman want to help a man guard something he'd fought hard for. She married him in October, 10 months after that fundraiser dinner. Small ceremony, my backyard, string lights in the dogwoods. I walked her down a gravel path instead of an aisle because that's what she wanted, and I stood there in my one good suit and gave my little girl to a man I'd shaken hands with maybe 6 times. I want to tell you, I had a bad feeling that day. I didn't. That's the truth, and I think it's important to tell you the truth, even when it doesn't make me look sharp. I thought he was stiff, a little too rehearsed in his toast. But stiff isn't a crime, and I'd been wrong about people before. The feeling came later. Small things first. He mentioned his clinic's revenue at dinner more than felt natural, always in round, impressive numbers, always followed by a glance to see if it landed. He talked about protecting the practice, the way other men talk about protecting their children. He asked Denise, more than once, in that easy joking tone people use when they're not really joking, whether her business had any real assets or was mostly just a service thing. Mostly just a service thing. My daughter had built that firm with her own 2 hands out of grief and grit, and he called it a service thing. Then came the folder on my back porch. I sat with it after he left that morning, turning it over, not opening it yet. I'll admit something to you. Part of me wanted to call Denise right then and lay the whole thing out. But I've lived 63 years, and I've learned that the fastest way to lose your daughter's trust is to tell her the man she loves is running a con before you've got a single fact to back it up. Women don't need their fathers riding in with accusations. They need their fathers with proof. So I opened the folder instead. 14 pages. Legal language dressed up to look reasonable. It laid out, in careful, lawyerly detail, everything Grant was bringing into the marriage that he wanted protected: the clinic, its equipment, its accounts, a rental property he apparently owned outright, investment accounts I'd never heard mentioned. And on page 9, one line, almost buried: Denise Ashwood's business interests are considered minimal and are not subject to equitable claim by either party. Minimal. He'd taken my daughter's life's work and reduced it to a footnote in his own protection plan. I sat on that porch a long time with my coffee going cold. And somewhere in there, a decision settled into my chest the way decisions do when you're old enough to know you're not going to change your mind about them. I picked up the phone and called the one man who'd never once given me bad advice in 40 years of friendship. Harold Beck, retired now, but he'd spent 35 years doing forensic accounting for the state, the kind of work that taught him to read a man's finances the way a hunter reads tracks in mud. We'd fished together every October since Reagan was in office. Harold, I said, I need a favor, and I need you not to ask why for a minute. When have I ever asked why? He said. What do you need? I need you to find out everything real about a man named Grant Ashwood, not what he says. What's real? There was a pause on the line, the kind Harold does when he's already 3 steps ahead of you. This about Denise's husband? It's about a folder he put on my table this morning. Give me 2 weeks, Harold said. If you're new here, this is usually the part where I remind you, hitting that like button costs you nothing, and it means everything to folks like me trying to build something out here. Now let me tell you what Harold found, because it changes everything you think you know about this story. It took him 9 days, not 2 weeks. Harold called on a Wednesday night, and I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard since he testified against a county commissioner back in 2003. Walter, sit down. I'm sitting. That clinic isn't his. Not free and clear. It's leveraged up past its ears. 2 business loans, one from a regional bank, one from a private lender charging rates that'd make a loan shark blush. He's behind on both. There's a lien filed against the equipment, Walter. X-ray machines, exam tables, the works, filed 4 months ago. I set my coffee down slow, the way you do when your hands want to shake and you won't let them. The rental property in the agreement, Harold went on, it's underwater. He owes more than it's worth. And those investment accounts he listed, 2 of the 3 were closed last year. Emptied out. I don't know where that money went yet, but it didn't go into anything I can find. So the man who wants my daughter to sign away her business, I said, is himself worth less than nothing. Worse than that, Harold said. He's worth negative several $100,000, best I can figure. And Walter, that folder he gave you? If Denise signs it, she's not protecting herself from him. She's protecting him from her. If this marriage ends, that agreement makes sure none of his debt ever touches her, and none of her assets, the only real, functioning, profitable thing in that household, are on the table for him to claim either. He gets to keep pretending to be a successful man on paper while quietly needing her income to survive. I sat with that for a long moment, looking out at the dogwoods where my daughter had gotten married 4 months earlier. He's not protecting his empire, I said slowly. He's hiding that there isn't one. That's about the size of it, Harold said. Now, here's the thing about being 63 years old and having run a construction company for 30 of those years. You learn that the loudest man in the room is usually compensating for something, and the quietest man is usually the one holding all the load-bearing information. Grant thought he was dealing with an old-timer who'd nod along and stay out of it. He had no idea he was dealing with a man who'd spent 3 decades reading contractors' books to figure out which ones were about to go under before the bank did. I didn't confront him. I want you to understand that, because I know some of you watching are already yelling at your screen for me to march over there and lay it all out on the table. That's not how you win this kind of thing. You confront a man like Grant Ashwood too early, He lawyers up, he covers his tracks, and worst of all, he turns it into a fight where Denise has to choose a side before she's ready to see clearly. No, you let him keep digging his own hole. You just make sure you're the one standing at the bottom with a shovel when he finally falls in. Instead, I did something Grant never saw coming, because men like him never think to look at the quiet father-in-law who shows up to Sunday dinner in the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. I called my daughter and asked her to walk me through her business, the real numbers, the way I used to walk contractors through mine. Daddy, why the sudden interest? Because I'm getting old, I said, which wasn't a lie, and I want to understand what my daughter built before I'm not around to ask. She lit up talking about it. Client retention numbers, the new tax software she'd invested in, the 2 employees she'd hired last spring who were finally letting her take a Saturday off now and then. Her firm wasn't flashy. It didn't come with a leased sedan or a watch worth mentioning at dinner parties. But it was real, it was profitable, and it was growing steady, the way things grow when somebody actually knows what they're doing. You know, I told her, a business like that is worth protecting properly. Real protection. Not just a piece of paper somebody hands you to sign. She got quiet on the phone for a second. Grant mentioned something about paperwork, protecting our finances going forward. Is that what you mean? There it was. She knew. Some part of her already knew. The way Denise always knows things 3 steps before she lets herself say them out loud. What do you think about it? I asked. Careful. The way you handle a load you're not sure is stable yet. I think, she said slowly, that it's strange he wants to protect assets I've never actually seen documentation for. I asked him for the clinic's financials once. For our own planning, he got funny about it, said it was complicated. Complicated. That's the word men like Grant use right before you find out exactly how uncomplicated the truth actually is. I didn't push her further that night. I let her sit with her own instincts, because a woman coming to the truth on her own holds onto it a lot tighter than a woman who's handed the truth by her father like a verdict. Over the following weeks, I did what I do best. I watched, and I built. I had Harold keep digging, quietly, carefully, layer by layer, the way you'd want a man checking the foundation of a house before you let your family move in. We found the private lender was owned by a holding company 2 states away, and that holding company had already filed a notice of intent to foreclose on the clinic's equipment if the next payment was missed. We found Grant had taken out a personal loan against a truck he didn't technically own outright, co-signed by his own mother, who I don't believe had any idea what she'd actually signed. We found that rough patch with investor's story he'd told Denise wasn't some early career hardship. It was a lawsuit, settled quietly 2 years back, from 3 former patients who'd paid up front for a wellness program the clinic never delivered. Every piece we found, I wrote down in a plain manila folder of my own. No fancy letterhead. Just facts, dated and sourced, the way I used to document every change order on a job site so nobody could ever say I hadn't warned them. I'm not going to pretend those weeks were easy for me. There were nights I sat up later than I should have, looking at old photographs of Denise as a little girl, riding on my shoulders at the county fair, and feeling something heavier than anger. Something closer to grief, if I'm honest with you. The same way you grieve when you watch somebody you love walk toward a cliff edge they can't see yet. I'd buried my wife 9 years back. I knew grief when it sat down next to me at the table. This was a cousin of it. The grief of watching, and waiting, and trusting that patience would do what shouting never could. There was one night in particular, February, cold enough that the porch boards creaked under the frost. I sat out there with a glass of bourbon I never touched, just held it, watching my breath fog up in the porch light, and I thought about calling Denise right then and telling her everything, just laying it all out and letting the chips fall. I sat with that temptation for a long while. Then I poured the bourbon back into the bottle, because wasting good whiskey felt like the wrong kind of dramatic, and I went to bed. The next morning I called Harold instead and asked him what we needed to make this airtight. 2 more weeks, he said. The foreclosure notice on the equipment. That's the piece that changes everything. Once that's public record, there's no explaining it away. 2 weeks. Grant had given Denise a 14-page document dressed up like protection. I was about to hand her something with a lot fewer pages and a great deal more truth in it. The foreclosure notice hit public record on a Friday in late March. Harold called me before 9 in the morning, and for the first time in this whole business, I heard something in his voice that sounded almost like satisfaction. It's done, Walter. Filed yesterday afternoon. 60 days to cure the default or the lender takes the equipment. Every x-ray machine, every exam table, the works. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat there a minute looking out at the dogwoods, bare now in the late winter light. Then I called my daughter. Denise, honey, can you come by the house this weekend? Just you. I want to talk about something. She came Saturday afternoon, and I could tell by the way she walked up the porch steps, careful, watchful, that some part of her already suspected this wasn't going to be a conversation about the weather. I set the folder on the table between us, the same table Grant had used 4 months earlier, and I didn't say a word at first. I just let her open it. I watched my daughter's face while she read. I want to tell you that watching your child's heart break in real time, even when you know it's the kindest thing you could do for her, is one of the hardest things this life asks of a father. She read slower and slower, and about halfway through, her hand came up to cover her mouth, and she didn't take it away again until she'd finished the last page. The lawsuit, she said finally, quiet. The investors he told me about. That was Patience. He took their money and never delivered. Settled out of court, I said. Sealed, mostly. Not hidden well enough. And the clinic. It's not even really his anymore, is it? Not free and clear. 60 days, I said, before the bank takes the equipment out from under him. She sat back slow, the folder still open on her lap, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Outside, a car went by on the road. Somebody's dog barked twice and stopped, the ordinary world carrying on the way it does, indifferent to whatever's breaking apart at a kitchen table. He asked me to sign an agreement, she said finally. Protecting his assets, his real estate, his investment accounts. I know, I said. I've read it. There's nothing real to protect, is there? No, sweetheart, I said. There isn't. What he's protecting is you not finding that out. If this marriage ends and you sign that agreement, none of his debt ever touches you. But none of what you built touches him either, and he needs it, Denise. He needs your income more than he's let you understand, because his own well's already run dry. She was quiet a long time, longer than I expected. When she finally spoke, her voice had that same steadiness I remembered from when she was 12 years old and had to tell me her first dog had died. That particular calm that only comes from a person choosing not to fall apart yet because there's still work to do. I want to see everything, she said. Every page. And Daddy, I want you to walk me through it the way you'd walk a client through a bad set of books. That's my girl. We sat at that table for 4 hours. I laid it all out for her, careful, factual, no editorializing, letting the numbers speak the way I'd learned to let them speak decades ago, because numbers don't lie even when people do. By the time the sun went down, Denise wasn't a woman blindsided anymore. She was a woman with a plan. She didn't confront him that night. That was her choice, not mine, and I respected it, because by then she'd earned the right to decide how this ended. She went home, made dinner the way she always did, asked about his day the way she always did, and gave him absolutely nothing to read in her face. Turns out my daughter learned patience from somewhere. She spent the next 10 days quietly consulting an attorney of her own, a sharp woman named Priscilla Okafor who Harold had recommended, somebody who specialized in exactly this kind of unraveling. Denise moved money into an account solely in her name, the way any sensible business owner should have done from day one. She pulled her business entirely clear of any joint liability. And she waited for the right moment, the way I'd taught her without ever quite meaning to teach her anything. The moment came on a Tuesday evening. Grant came home late from the clinic, tie loosened, looking like a man carrying something heavy he hadn't told anyone about yet, which, as it turned out, he was. Denise had dinner on the table. She'd made his favorite, roast chicken, the kind of small kindness that makes betrayal cut so much deeper when it finally lands, though this time the betrayal wasn't hers to carry. Grant, she said, once he'd sat down. I read the postnuptial agreement carefully. He looked up, something flickering behind his eyes. Hope, maybe, that this was finally the easy part. I'm glad. I think it's fair to both of us. It would be, she said, if there were anything real on your side of it to be fair about. I wasn't there for this part. Denise told me about it after, and I've turned it over in my mind enough times since that I feel like I could recite it word for word. What are you talking about? He said. The lien on your equipment, she said. Filed 4 months ago. The foreclosure notice. Filed 3 weeks back. 60 days to cure. The lawsuit from your patients. The one you told me was investors burning you early on. I have copies of all of it, Grant. I have copies of everything. He went very still, she said. The kind of stillness that isn't calm, just calculation running behind a frozen face. You've been investigating me. You handed my father a document telling him my life's work was minimal, she said, and asked for his blessing to keep it that way. Did you think none of us would look a little closer at yours? He tried, she said, to talk his way out of it, the way men like that always do. Some story about restructuring, about timing, about how she was misunderstanding the situation. Denise let him talk until he ran out of words. The same patient silence I'd used on him at my own table 4 months earlier. And when he finally stopped, she slid a folder of her own across the table. Not the postnup he'd drafted. A different document, Priscilla's work, clean and precise, laying out a full and equal division should the marriage end, one that accounted for exactly what existed, which meant, in practical terms, that his debts stayed his, and her business stayed entirely, unmistakably hers. You wanted a document, she said. Here's one. Sign it or don't. But I'm done pretending I don't know what's actually sitting in this house with us. He didn't sign it that night. Men like Grant rarely surrender on the first ask. But 3 weeks later, with the equipment foreclosure closing in and no capital left to stop it, and with his mother, once she learned what she'd actually co-signed, refusing to bail him out a second time, he signed. Quietly. No fight left in him by then, because there was nothing left to fight with. The divorce, when it came that summer, was almost anticlimactic, which I've come to believe is the truest sign of a battle already won long before anybody sat down at a table with lawyers. Denise kept her firm, untouched, thriving even, because word travels in a town this size, and more than a few people respected a woman who'd handled her business, in every sense of that word, with her head held high. Grant kept his debts, his foreclosed equipment, and a clinic that closed its doors for good that October. I saw him once more, actually, at the grocery store of all places, back in the produce section. He looked smaller than I remembered, the way men do once the performance stops paying rent. He nodded at me, careful, like he wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd get. Walter, he said. Grant, I said back. Nothing more. I didn't need more. I picked out my tomatoes and went on with my day. And I want you to know, family, it didn't feel like triumph. Exactly. It felt like something settling back into its proper place, the way a house settles after a storm you weren't sure it would survive. Denise came by the porch a few weeks after everything was final, sat down across from me at that same table where this whole thing started, and for a while neither of us said much of anything. Just sat together the way we used to before any of this happened, watching the dogwoods sway. You knew from that first morning, she said finally. It wasn't really a question. I had a feeling, I said. Feelings aren't proof. I needed proof before I ever said a word to you. You could have just told me. Saved me 8 months of marriage to a man who never actually had anything. Could have, I agreed. But you wouldn't have believed me. Not really. Not deep down, where it counts. You'd have believed the folder he handed you, because he handed it to you first and people trust whoever gets there first. I needed you to see the truth for yourself, in your own time, so it would actually stick. She reached over and put her hand on top of mine, the way she used to when she was small enough to still need help crossing a parking lot. Thank you for waiting, she said. I know that wasn't easy for you. Wasn't easy, I said. But it was right, and sometimes, sweetheart, those two things take their sweet time lining up. That fall, Denise's firm took on 2 new employees and moved into a bigger office downtown, real signage out front this time, her name on the door. I went to the little ribbon cutting she did, stood in the back the way I always do, and watched my daughter shake hands with the mayor like it was nothing at all, like she hadn't spent the better part of a year finding out exactly what she was made of. Somebody asked her that day what advice she'd give young women starting out in business. She thought about it a second, and then she said the thing that's stuck with me ever since. the thing I think about most nights now on this porch. Know your own numbers better than anyone else ever could, she said, because eventually, somebody's going to hand you a version of your worth that isn't true, and the only thing that saves you is already knowing better. I sat on that porch a long time after everybody left, glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand, and I thought about Harold and the dogwoods and a 14-page folder that started this whole thing. I built what I built in this life with my own 2 hands, and I protected what mattered most to me the only way I know how, quietly, patiently, one careful step at a time. Grant made his choices. Denise made hers. I made mine. And family, I'll tell you the truth, same as I always try to. I'm at peace with how it ended. If this story meant something to you, do an old man a favor and hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I'll see you next time, right here on the porch.